Okay, welcome to today's video, folks. For today we're going to be making Pate Brisee or Flaky Pie Dough. One rule for your Flaky Pie Dough: everything needs to be cold. Your butter should be sitting in the weigh it out, sit it in the fridge until you need it. Water, weigh it out, put it in the freezer until you need it. The idea is that everything stays cold, so your butter stays cold and it doesn't melt into your dough, and we're left with lovely flaky long chunks of butter. Okay, so to begin, our flour goes into our bowl with our salt, and we're just going to mix that around gently. Okay, and now all in one go I'm going to add my butter. Okay, cut into kind of roughly 1 inch or so chunks, and we're just going to firstly toss our butter in our flour. Before I pick up the butter, and you can see between my index finger and my thumb, just kind of start to smash the butter into flakes to begin with, and this makes it easier for us to work our butter into our butter sizes. So a quick note on the size of the butter we're looking for in our Pate Brisee. Your butter should be the size of, or should be pea-sized more or less, when you're ready to add your flour. The bigger your butter chunks, the bigger the flakes are going to be. The more or less liquid that you can use in your filling in your pie dough, the smaller your butter flakes, the more liquid your filling can be. But generally for Pate Brisee, we're going to be using it for pre-baked fillings. So things like maybe lemon curd or jams or chocolate ganache, anything along those lines works super well with this guy, because basically you don't want a liquid filling pouring in. If you think about this dough, or the structure of this dough, like a concrete or like a brick wall, and you take out the mortar between the bricks, that's basically what you have in your pie dough. And with that being in your pie dough, if you then pour something liquid into your pie shell, that liquid is just going to run down through those gaps in your dough created by your butter, which is going to leave your pie that dreaded, or give your pie that dreaded soggy bottom. Okay, so not a lot of work involved here. You can see if I take some of my butter chunks and just roll them up, they're going to be more or less the size of a pea. Okay, at this point I'm going to add about half of my water into my dough. Okay, and then what I do is a technique called papillon, or known as papillon. You take your butter or you take your dough and nothing more than kind of lift it between your fingers to add your water to the dough. Your dough should be quite rough and quite dry looking right now, but the amount of water you need in your dough is based on how much of your flour is covered in butter and how much flour is still just flour in your dough. Okay, all you're looking for, and you can see it becomes quite kind of pasty quite quickly. All you want from this dough is something that you can bring together and press, and it will hold its shape. So you can see as I press this guy and then move it apart, it's still falling apart. So I know that I'm going to need a little bit more water into my dough. Okay, so that's all my water, which is only kind of 90 grams or so, or more or less 3 ounces. And you can see even with that amount of water, I can start pressing this together and it becomes a cohesive ball of dough pretty quickly. So all I do is press that together to become a nice cohesive dough in my bowl. You don't want to work this, you don't want to do anything with it. Now that your butter is relatively soft from the process that we've, from the cutting in process, we don't want to do anything more with this right now. Okay, so my butter is going to be taken out onto the table. Oh, a little bit of flour and butter left in the bowl. So out onto my table, as I said, still quite a rough, shaggy dough, okay, which is kind of exactly what you're looking for. And all I'm going to do is take some plastic wrap, wrap my dough nice and tight. And my dough can go into the fridge for about an hour or so before I roll it out to fill my pie tin. And we're now going to take our dough. You'll have noticed I've kind of cut my dough a little bit to size, because what the dough you guys made is enough for kind of two, more or less, 8 to 9 inch pies, or 16 to 18 centimeters. So I cut it down a little bit. What you'll notice is, as it's been in the fridge, it's kind of homogenized a little bit. And you'll also notice on the side that I've cut that there's kind of lots of little strands of butter in there. That's what's going to give us all of our flakes. Okay, so what we need to do, take a little bit of flour, flour your work surface. I have obviously changed out my usual tiled work surface for a slab of granite. The reason is I don't want to have my dough sticking to and taking on the tile grout kind of pattern. So I'm taking something flat, and I'm just going to take my rolling pin, start rolling out. What I'm doing as I'm rolling, every time I roll in one direction, move it 45 degrees, roll again, 45 degrees, roll again. And we're always just rolling forwards and backwards, but we're always doing a 45-degree turn. The reason is, it will help to keep this dough somewhat kind of circular in shape. And obviously we have a circular pie tin. So if we have something circular in terms of our pie tin and something circular in terms of our shape, we're going to have less excess dough. What we're also going to do with this dough is blind bake it. Blind baking is essentially the process of putting or weighing your dough down as you're baking it. Because if you remember what I was saying in the video earlier, this kind of dough generally we don't use for all-in-one baking, and we don't kind of fill before it goes into the oven because of all of these streaks of butter that you can kind of see developing in our dough here. All of those are going to give us some lovely layers in our dough. And what we don't want to happen is we add liquid on top of those layers, because all we end up getting is something kind of soft. One of the things that happens with your flaky pie dough quite often is that a larger chunk of butter will be slightly cold. So you've probably seen over here my dough has started to rip a little bit as I'm rolling it. The reason is you have a slightly larger chunk of butter, and that butter is kind of cold. So what you need to do is just kind of press that back together. It will hopefully warm up that chunk of butter, and therefore your dough will just kind of stick back together. So once I have my dough rolled out, okay, I'm gonna, oh, there's another little hole. I'm gonna take my pie dish again, place it on top of my dough, make sure that there's kind of a lip all the way around my dough. Pretty happy with how that is. So you can see there's kind of excess dough all the way around, which kind of tells me that if I take into account that this dough or this pie dish is kind of tapered, that I'm going to have enough dough here to fill my pie dish. So I take my rolling pin, I roll my dough back up onto my rolling pin. Okay, it's still going to be pretty rough. That's absolutely fine, completely normal. Remember, you have lots of kind of buttery chunks. And then I'm going to take my rolling pin, put my pie dough on top of the dish, and just roll it out to fill in my dish like so. Okay, I'm then going to fold it in all the way around. Okay, and I've kind of filled out all of my pie dish here. And make sure you're pressing nicely into the corners, because the last thing we want is that these guys rise up as we're baking. And once your tin is filled, what you're going to do is come along with your knife, or with a flat knife, and using that flat knife, you're just going to run around the edge of your pie dish and take off your excess dough. Okay, there's lots of different kind of things you can do with the edge of your pie. You can also kind of crimp it in, but I like a nice clean edge with these guys, because you see a nice development of your layers when they come out of the oven, and things kind of look nice and kind of flaky and yeah, quite a kind of a deliberate, oh yeah, these are the flakes that you were looking for in your dish. So every time you roll out pie dough, your pie dough is now warm. If we were to put this warm pie dough straight into the oven, because your fat is warm, your pie dough would sink. Okay, so now what we need to do, pop our dough into the freezer for kind of 30 minutes or so before we bake, and then we'll come back and we'll do our setup for blind baking. Thanks for watching the video, folks. If you like what you saw, please give me a like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, follow me on Instagram, and remember to check back soon, because I'll be posting videos regularly on my channel. In the meantime, happy baking!